The soft morning sunlight filled the windows at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, lighting up the busy terminal and giving everything a warm, almost comfortable glow. Walking purposefully among the travelers was Rebecca, who carried herself with a quiet confidence that hinted at her leadership, even though she wore a simple navy blue blazer and comfortable slacks. Unlike most mornings, there was more than just her usual sense of responsibility pushing her forward. Today was the first flight on a brand new Delta route to Seattle, a project she had spent months building from an idea to reality. There was pride in the air, mixed with an underlying current of nervous energy she could not quite shake. Instead of announcing who she was, Rebecca chose to blend into the crowd. She wanted to see everything with fresh eyes, experiencing the same lines, announcements, and small talk as any other traveler. Clutching her boarding pass, she scanned the bustling gate area, paying attention to the smallest details. A friendly greeting from a flight attendant, the efficiency at the security line, even the cleanliness of the waiting area. Testing things from the inside was the plan. What Rebecca did not know was that today would bring far more than feedback on snack, choices, or boarding announcements. Something was coming that would push her in ways she never anticipated. Inside the plane, longtime flight attendant Patricia stood in front of the small mirror in the narrow restroom, carefully straightening her blue Delta scarf and smoothing loose hair behind her ears. She took a deep breath, trying to release some of the tension pressing on her shoulders after what had felt like the longest week in months. There had been delays, a double shift the day before, and more complaints than she could even count on her hands. Still, Patricia was determined to deliver the level of professionalism and friendly energy Delta expected on every flight. As she ran through the safety procedures in her mind, exit row instructions, the location of oxygen masks, the right way to reassure nervous travelers, she reminded herself that she could handle anything that came her way. Her silent promise was simple: nothing a passenger did today would throw her off. Even those picky travelers who asked for things like sparkling water with extra lemon or needed reassurance about turbulence, Patricia would manage it all with a steady smile. What she had no way of knowing was that, within a few hours, all her routines would be shaken up by a woman sitting quietly in row 15. On the surface, this passenger looked just like any other, but she held a secret that would completely turn Patricia's day, and maybe even her career, upside down. Boarding soon began, and as Rebecca finally reached the front of the line, she was welcomed by Patricia, who greeted her with the kind of practiced smile that comes from years in the job. Patricia barely glanced at Rebecca, just long enough to check the boarding pass and gesture politely toward the seats at the front of the plane. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. Your seat is just down this aisle to the left," Patricia said, her voice calm and friendly, but with a hint of the tiredness from her long week. Rebecca nodded, returning the polite smile, and moved to her seat in business class. As she made her way down the aisle, she subtly watched the way the crew worked together, the quick glances between attendants, the whispered reminders about carry-ons, the little moments of coordination and anticipation. Quietly, she made mental notes: how efficiently the pre-flight process was running, the tone of the announcements, even whether the pillows looked fresh. She caught a subtle tension in the crew's body language, but shrugged it off, thinking it was probably just the usual nerves that come with launching a new route. After all, she'd seen dozens of inaugural flights and knew the pressure was always on. What she didn't realize was that this tension would soon become far less abstract and much more personal for everyone on board. Midway through the flight, as the cabin settled into a quiet routine, the crew began serving dinner. When Patricia reached Rebecca's row, she asked, "Chicken or pasta this evening?" Rebecca looked at the menu, her face showing concern. "Actually, I have a pretty severe nut allergy. I noticed the chicken says it comes with a nut sauce. Is there any chance I could switch to a plain meal or something else? Patricia, already feeling stretched thin by cabin requests and a growing list of things to check, gave a quick sigh, barely concealing her frustration. Without meeting Rebecca's eyes, she muttered, "We have a lot of requests tonight. We're already running behind." Then she placed the tray down without another word and moved on to the next row, leaving Rebecca with a lukewarm pasta and the clear feeling that her request had not been heard. Rebecca stayed composed, even though she felt uncomfortable and a bit disappointed. She quietly made a note for her review, careful to remember every detail. Glancing around, she picked up on dissatisfied expressions from a few other passengers as well. It seemed no one wanted to speak up. People just traded uneasy looks as the flight attendants hurried past. The mood in the cabin was changing bit by bit. Every time a new request was brushed aside, everyone could feel tension starting to grow. Back in the galley, Patricia let out a deep breath and ran her hand through her hair, obviously annoyed. She turned to Mark, her fellow flight attendant, and muttered, "I swear, some of these passengers are never satisfied. One wants a special meal. Another complains the coffee isn't hot enough. It's non-stop. I don't get paid enough to deal with this attitude every single day." Mark kept his voice steady and gentle, knowing Patricia had been stretched to her limit this week. "Hey, look, I get it. It's been rough, but we can't let it get to us. Delta expects us to keep things running smoothly, especially on these big new routes. Just take a second and breathe. It'll be over before you know it." Patricia nodded, but her jaw tensed. The steady build-up of exhaustion and the feeling that none of her hard work was being noticed started to turn her frustration into something heavier. With each complaint, large or small, she felt more resentment. Deep down, she decided she would not put up with what she saw as disrespect from any passenger, no matter who they were. Unfortunately, caught up in her irritation, Patricia could not see that her attitude was starting to cross a line. This shift in her thinking would soon have a much bigger impact than she realized. Returning to her seat, Rebecca realized that her request for a safer meal had been completely overlooked. She pressed the call button, waiting patiently as Patricia made her way down the aisle. When Patricia arrived, Rebecca tried to keep her voice level but clear. "Excuse me, but I just want to be sure there are no nuts in my meal. I asked earlier, and I'm really concerned because of my allergy." Patricia, already on edge from her conversation with Mark, bristled at the comment. Instead of offering reassurance or checking the meal, she spoke with a sharpness that caught everyone nearby off guard. "Ma'am, I already told you we are doing our best. We can't make special arrangements for everyone. If what you have isn't suitable, I'm afraid there's nothing else I can do." Her words hung in the air, and a few passengers within earshot shifted in their seats, stealing glances at the scene. Rebecca sat back, clearly unsettled, but still refusing to react emotionally. Instead, she met Patricia's eyes and gave a silent nod, letting it go for now, but storing the moment in her mind. Around her, the collective mood darkened. Small whispers darted back and forth, and the tension now felt almost suffocating, as if everyone was waiting for what would happen next. Further down the cabin, Captain Tom, catching the uncomfortable vibe spreading among the passengers, decided it was time to check on the situation himself. He made his way from the cockpit and stopped just out of earshot of the tense exchange. Not wanting to create a bigger scene, Tom approached Patricia quietly in the galley and asked, "Is everything all right out here?" I noticed some unsettled faces. Patricia, holding firm to her resolve, brushed him off with a practiced but stiff smile. "It's nothing, just a few demanding passengers. I have it under control, Captain." Tom, though not entirely convinced, nodded and returned to his station, anxiety building. He knew that even one bad encounter could reflect poorly on Delta, especially on a flight getting this much attention. Meanwhile, Rebecca settled back in her seat, deciding not to push the issue any further. The last thing she wanted was to make a scene or disrupt the flight for others. Silently, she kept track of every detail, not out of spite, but because she honestly wanted to get to the bottom of what had gone wrong. Sitting there, she felt a strange mix of disappointment and understanding, wondering how much stress someone has to carry before kindness gets lost. Suddenly, the plane shuddered as it hit a patch of turbulence. Drinks rattled on tray tables, and a few startled passengers looked around nervously. The seatbelt signs lit up. Right away, Patricia and the rest of the crew stopped what they were doing and began moving swiftly down the aisle, making sure everyone was buckled in and nothing was out of place. Patricia, still feeling the sting of her earlier interactions, tried to focus on her safety checks, but it was clear that her nerves were getting the best of her. As she hurried past Rebecca's row, the plane jolted again, and one of the serving trays slipped from Patricia's grip, clattering to the floor. Reacting on instinct, Rebecca leaned down to help, reaching out to steady the tray before it could spill. Patricia, already tense, looked at Rebecca with surprise and a touch of resentment, worried that the passengers around them might see this as a mistake on her part. The small act of help made Patricia feel exposed, as if her ability to manage the cabin was in question. With passengers' eyes following every move, Patricia quickly snatched the tray from Rebecca, giving a curt, "I can handle it, thank you," before moving on, trying to regain her composure as the turbulence continued. The turbulence finally died down, but the air inside the plane felt thick with a different kind of unrest. As Patricia made her way back up the aisle toward the galley, she could feel the weight of 100 watchful eyes. Each glance from a passenger seemed loaded with judgment. The knot of frustration and embarrassment in her chest only tightened with every step. When she reached Rebecca's row again to check seatbelts, she noticed Rebecca giving her a polite but unsure smile, clearly trying to smooth things over. But Patricia's nerves were shot. All of the day's stress, the endless requests, the feeling of being questioned, and her own sense of isolation suddenly boiled over. Acting on pure emotion, Patricia lost her composure and slapped Rebecca across the face. The sound was sharp, echoing through the tense silence of the cabin. The entire section froze, completely stunned by what they had just witnessed. You could have heard a pin drop, if not for a stray plastic cup tumbling off a nearby tray table. Rebecca sat perfectly still, her hand flying to her cheek, wide eyes searching the faces around her for some sense of what happened. The other passengers stared in disbelief, some with mouths hanging open, not quite sure what to do or say after something so shocking. Captain Tom rushed down the aisle as soon as he heard the commotion, his usually calm face tense with worry. He stopped in front of Patricia and Rebecca, catching sight of Rebecca's red cheek and the collective shock on the passengers' faces. Looking straight at Patricia, he demanded an explanation. Patricia, still shaking, tried to defend her actions, saying that Rebecca had provoked her, that the whole day had been building up and she just could not take it anymore. Her words came out fast, voice shaky, but the excuses landed flat in the charged silence. Rebecca, still in shock but holding herself together, stood up carefully. She looked around at the other passengers, then faced Tom and said quietly, "Can I please speak to you in private?" Her dignity only seemed to underscore how serious the incident felt to everyone watching. All around them, passengers broke into quiet, nervous murmurs. Some people pulled out their phones and started to record, trying to capture every second. Others traded worried glances or whispered about what might happen next. The tension in the cabin grew thicker by the second, leaving the crew to realize that this was not something they could just sweep under the rug and forget. Inside the small crew compartment near the front of the plane, Rebecca took a deep breath and turned to Captain Tom. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder with several official-looking documents. Her hands were steady as she handed them over and, with a quiet calm, said, "Tom, I did not want to come forward like this, but I think you need to know who I am." Tom looked down at the paperwork, his eyes widening as he read her name and credentials. Rebecca Miller, CEO and owner of Delta Airlines. For a second, he just stared, realizing that the fate of the company's reputation, and maybe even his own career, was suddenly tied up in this one flight. Rebecca kept her tone low and her words clear. "I want you to keep this as private as possible for now, but what just happened is unacceptable. I need you to make sure every passenger on board knows that we take their safety and respect seriously. Patricia cannot continue her duties for the rest of this flight. Find a way to reassign her immediately, and when we land, I expect a full report." Though Rebecca was in control, her face betrayed how much the whole situation hurt her. She had always tried to lead by example, and seeing this kind of failure weighed heavy on her heart. Back in the galley, Patricia sat alone, staring at her hands, while the hum of the engines filled the silence. She could barely make sense of her actions or the rapid unraveling of everything she had worked for. Guilt gnawed at her, twisting her stomach, and the reality that her job might be over crept in slowly and painfully. She replayed the scene over and over, wishing she had found some other way to handle the stress. The fear of losing not just her position, but the respect of her co-workers left her fighting to hold back tears. Nearby, her fellow crew member and longtime friend Sarah quietly approached. She placed a gentle hand on Patricia's shoulder, trying to offer some reassurance. "It's a mess, I know," Sarah whispered, "but right now you just need to breathe. We can't undo what happened, but maybe it's not the end." Even so, Sarah's face said otherwise. She knew some mistakes stuck for good, and this one echoed loud enough that it would reach all the way to the top. Word about the incident continued to move quietly among the rest of the flight crew. As each person found out, the mood in the cabin tightened. Everyone sensed that this wasn't just another bad day at work, but a turning point for all involved. The plane continued moving toward Los Angeles, but the atmosphere inside was nothing like before. Every row seemed unusually quiet, and passengers looked down at their books, phones, or the clouds outside rather than risk meeting the eyes of any flight attendant. Some whispered here and there, but most just sat in heavy silence, giving the crew a wide berth as they finished necessary duties. Rebecca returned to her seat, gathering herself as she walked past a few passengers who watched her with a mix of sympathy and curiosity. She managed a polite nod, then sat down, staring out at the distant landscape below. On the outside, she stayed calm and collected, the face of professionalism. But inside, her thoughts were in knots. The events of the last hour replayed over and over as she tried to imagine the right way forward. How was she supposed to handle what came next? She cared deeply about the reputation of Delta Airlines and believed every staff member deserved a chance to be heard, even when they made serious mistakes. Yet, she also knew there were rules and boundaries for a reason. As the responsibility for the company's values weighed on her, Rebecca realized that being at the top was a lonely place to be, especially in moments like this when every decision mattered. As the plane touched down in Los Angeles, you could sense everyone on board exhaling together. The stress was heavy, and now it settled over the runway and gate, thick as the morning fog. On the ground, a team from Delta Airlines was already waiting, standing near one of the jet bridges, their crisp uniforms and serious expressions telling everyone this was not a normal arrival. Captain Tom, doing his best to keep things controlled, spoke quietly with airport staff and explained what had happened, sticking to the facts and the company's emergency guidelines to make sure nothing leaked out before they were ready. The crew moved quickly, but kept everything low-key. Patricia was met just inside the cabin door by two Delta representatives, who gently but firmly guided her away from the main passenger crowd straight into a private lounge. They made sure she would not be recorded or confronted by anyone, protecting her dignity even as the seriousness of her actions became clear. Rebecca barely had time to collect herself before a couple of advisors met her at the gate, looking anxious as they whispered updates and led her toward a waiting car. Outside the plane, for everyone involved, uncertainty filled the air. Nobody knew what would happen next or how far the fallout might spread. In a private conference room tucked away from the busy gates of LAX, Rebecca called an urgent meeting with Delta's top executives. The group, still dressed for their various flights and meetings, gathered around the large oval table, laptops open and notebooks ready. As soon as the doors closed, Rebecca stood and spoke with calm, deliberate honesty. She walked them through the events on the flight, not glossing over any uncomfortable detail. Every word was careful, matching the gravity of the situation. She described Patricia's action, her own decision to reveal her identity, and the way the other passengers and crew had been affected. As she finished, people around the table exchanged worried looks. The possibility of media interest was impossible to ignore. News about the airline, especially something this serious, could be on every channel by morning. Tension built as questions started to fly, some about company policy and others about damage control. Rebecca put up a hand, bringing the room to quiet. "We do not hide problems," she said, her voice steady. "There will be a full, open investigation. No one is going to be made an example of before all sides are heard. We owe that to everyone involved, staff and passengers alike." She made it clear. Justice mattered, but so did fairness. While Rebecca and her team met behind closed doors, Patricia found herself seated across a small table from two representatives from Delta's Human Resources Department. It was a plain room, more comfortable than intimidating, but Patricia still found it hard to meet their eyes. She took a deep breath and did not hide from the truth, clearly admitting that what she had done was wrong. Yet, as she explained her side, she went deeper than the one mistake. She talked about the endless back-to-back flights, picking up extra shifts when people called out, and how exhausted she felt after working 12-hour days all week long. She described the constant rush and stress, and how nobody on the team ever seemed to have a real chance to talk with a counselor or just take a breather. The people interviewing her listened closely, and as Patricia spoke, they saw the story was bigger than one bad decision on a rough flight. It became clear that there were issues boiling under the surface. Poor scheduling, lack of mental health support, and managers who talked about company values but missed signs of burnout. Patricia's interview opened the door to a deeper look, and soon Delta decided a full investigation was needed to understand and fix these broader problems for the whole crew. Rebecca stayed closely involved as the investigation moved forward, taking time to meet with several employees from all parts of the airline. She listened not only to Patricia's story, but also to voices from ground crew, ticket agents, and other flight attendants who'd seen the same issues play out again and again. Each person's story added new layers. People working late into the night, not enough staff to cover busy routes, and a culture where people were afraid to bring up the strain they felt or mistakes they noticed. What struck Rebecca the most was how many of them said they loved their jobs but were simply worn thin. Hearing these experiences stirred a mix of frustration and a real sense of duty inside her. This was bigger than one incident, and it could not be ignored any longer. Feeling the weight of all this, Rebecca decided to gather everyone together. She called a town hall meeting, inviting employees from customer service, pilots, maintenance, and even some airport managers. The mood in the big conference hall was tense at first, but as Rebecca opened the floor and encouraged honest feedback, people slowly started to share real ideas and frustrations. No one pretended everything was fine anymore, but as the conversation grew, a cautious hope began to take hold. For the first time in a long while, folks believed real change might actually happen. It did not take long for the news to break out. Reporters picked up the story, and soon it was flashing on major networks and trending all over social media. Cameras showed up outside Delta's headquarters, waiting for official word. Rebecca knew hiding from the media was not an option. Instead, she arranged a press conference and stood in front of a crowded room, packed with journalists and flashing cameras. She spoke directly, not dodging the tough questions. Rebecca explained what had happened on the flight, outlined the challenges employees faced, and described where Delta had fallen short in supporting its people. She accepted personal responsibility, making clear that leadership needed to change for the better. Then she rolled out a new plan for restructuring that included more support for staff, better scheduling, and mental health resources. Her straightforward attitude caught everyone off guard. By choosing honesty and courage instead of excuses, Rebecca shifted the tone of the whole conversation. The public's reaction softened. Many felt empathy for both the crew and those at the top trying to fix things. Watching the live coverage from her apartment, Patricia felt the tension in her chest loosen. There was comfort in hearing Rebecca frame her story fairly. For the first time in ages, Patricia felt seen, not just another employee, but someone with a story worth hearing. A few months down the line, the changes at Delta became hard to miss. New policies rolled out one after another. Regular mental health check-ins, better leadership training for supervisors, and a secure, anonymous reporting channel that actually listened to people's concerns. Flight crews and ground staff noticed the shifts right away. Schedules were more balanced and breaks became a real part of the routine. People no longer felt pressured to work until exhaustion, and if anyone needed help, resources were just a phone call away. Passengers started picking up on the lighter mood too, and for the first time in years, both customer and employee satisfaction surveys showed the kind of results people talked about in boardrooms. Eventually, Delta hosted a recognition ceremony at their Atlanta headquarters to celebrate everyone who had contributed to the turnaround. Rebecca was there, standing a bit nervously until she saw Patricia arrive. The two women exchanged a look that said more than any words. When they took the stage, both spoke honestly about mistakes, lessons, and the hard journey they'd shared. As they shook hands, the applause in the room was real and warm. This was more than a public gesture. It was a sign of real forgiveness and a promise to keep working for a better future together. What started out as a disaster people wished they could forget slowly became a turning point for Delta and everyone who had played a part in the story. Those tense days of uncertainty, embarrassment, and long meetings were no longer talked about with shame, but used as an example of what could happen when real change was possible. For Rebecca, the stress had been almost unbearable at times, but looking back, she felt something new, a quiet pride. She had faced moments when it would have been so much easier to look the other way, to sweep everything aside and move on. Instead, she stuck with it, admitting mistakes, hearing criticism, and meeting tough questions with honest answers. It was not easy, and honestly, it never would be, but Rebecca could now see what true leadership meant. Standing by a terminal window at Hartsfield-Jackson, she watched one of Delta's newest planes taking off into a sky streaked with morning light. The last few months had shown her that sometimes you have to learn the hard way, accept the bumps, and keep growing right alongside your team. More than anything, she realized leadership was about transformation, turning setbacks into shared victories. The view from here felt clearer, and the possibilities seemed wider than they ever had before.